Nobody ever stays the same. And to think you're going to stay the same is a false premise. So you need to be focused on that open funnel of bringing people into the organization. And that's whether you're a team or you're a brokerage. It doesn't make a difference. And think of it this way too. There's really talented people out there too. So you're constantly trying to improve the talent pool that you have. So you should always be bringing people in. That is by far the number one most important thing.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Triangle Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Fagioli, and today I get the privilege to talk to one of the guys that I consider one of the smartest brains in the real estate industry, specific to brokerage and how to run a really profitable, thriving brokerage. So if you're a broker owner, member subscriber of Triangle MLS, listen up to this one where I talked to Dean Cottrill from T3 about his 7 key areas to measure and manage if you want to run an incredibly profitable, thriving brokerage in 2023 and beyond. So without further ado, here's my interview with Dean Cottrill. Okay, guys, welcome back. I cannot wait to dig into our conversation with our special guest, Dean Cottrill from T3. Dean has had an illustrious career in the brokerage space and now coaches and consults with some of the biggest and best brokers across the country. And so Dean's going to share with us, some pretty powerful insights into what it looks like to be in the brokerage business right now. And so Dean, before we dig in, can you just give everybody a little bit deeper background than I just did into, where you've been and what you're doing now?
You bet. Matt, thank you. It's good to be here with you. So I'm at 33 years in the industry now. I started right out of college. I had an accounting degree, born and raised in Pittsburgh, went down to Washington, D.C. right out of college and didn't like accounting. So I quickly went to a night class at a community college, got a real estate license, and started moving into real estate. Back in 89, 1990, really got started. And at the time, investing was of interest to me. I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, so I needed to sell houses. I used to say I knew what a Kraft macaroni and cheese. They had 2 boxes for 99 cents because I lived on that for a while at that time in the very early stages of my career. But as I grew, I went through GRI, I went through CRS, I became an associate broker. Early on, I became a very strong primary market geographic farmer. So I did that for 8 years. So as toward the agent role, I worked it and did it very successfully. My daughter was born, who's now 27. And so at that time, I wanted a little more weekend time. I was holding 6 open houses a month. I was doing a bunch of stuff, running around on weekends as we do in real estate space. And so I actually got offered a position by Jim Weichert. Weichert Realtors had moved out of New Jersey into DC. It was the first time he left New Jersey. He bought the 55 offices for Prudential Preferred Properties back when Prudential was in the business. And I sat in one of those offices. So it became from blue, it went to Pantone yellow. And I sat in the same desk, same office. And I was Weichert agent. And about 6-8 months later, they invited me. They would ask me to become a manager. Timing was right because my daughter being born, as I shared with you. So I moved into the management role and I did that. And I managed sales offices for 2 of the largest independent brokerages over the next decade. So I was with Weichert for about 3 years. And then I went to Wes Foster's company, Long & Foster. And I was there for almost 8 with Long & Foster. Learned a lot in that process. I had a lot of success in those offices, grew them, took them from the Long & Foster office from a loss to over $1 million in profit in 3 years. Took it from 20 agents to over 100 in those 3 years as well as agent count. And then I moved on to NRT. NRT is the company-owned stores for Anywhere now. It used to be Realogy, but Anywhere is called Anywhere Advisors now. So I ran the Baltimore company. Then I took over the Mid-Atlantic. And over a 10-year run there, my last role, I oversaw the East Coast from Georgia up through Delaware. It was a 4,000 agent operation. And we had multiple divisions. We had a resort rental division with 3,000 properties. We had a commercial brokerage. We had, of course, the residential side of it, property management, mortgage, title, warranty, insurance. So we had all the bells and whistles, all the balls in the air. And, and we did about a little over $10 billion in sales when I left there in 17. And I moved to this role where I am now, where I actually run the brokerage and team consulting division for T360. I work with my team and the whole T3 team to support brokerages and teams to run more effectively, more efficiently, and more profitably is my role.
Man, well, that's a huge mouthful, but I think it's really significant. I know, and you know this, I've met or talked to or interviewed every coach, every trainer, every consultant in the real estate space, I think. And I think you could put your resume up against any of them in terms of what you've actually done in the business. And and some of those guys have never sold a house. So, our audience here is all of the agents and broker subscriber members of Triangle MLS. And we all bring that attitude, right? You do too. Like, does this guy ever sold anything? So should I listen to him or not? So, guys, between you and me, you can listen to this guy. He's kind of done it all. So, but look, Dean, you have the opportunity to get a look inside of all these brokerages now in your role with T3, and not even just in the front door, but in the books, in the back end, in like all the dirt, like you know what it is to run a brokerage. And, if you're listening to this interview and you are a broker owner right now, lean in and listen up, because Dean knows what you've got under your rug there. And me as a former broker owner, I know too, but Dean, just kind of share a little bit with us of, I don't want to say skeletons in the closet, but like, what are the things, you get on the phone with a broker owner and it's the first time you've talked and the guy just starts like say, well, like, this is what it is. This is my agent count. Like these are like, what are the problems? What are the things you hear all the time? And you're like, okay, check that box.
Yeah. Well, there's, it's growth, it's profitability is number one. It's always the big, we start with, if you're not profitable, you're not going to be in business very long, right? Depending on your resources. So profitability, we starts there. And then from that, we then dissect an organization down to say, okay, how are you performing in some key areas? Because as we know, Matt, there's so many rabbit holes that could run down in our business. You can run down a rabbit hole and get lost, or squirrel, another squirrel there, or shiny penny, however you want to explain it. So you got to be careful on that time and effort and energy that you spend in certain areas. So one of the things we do is help our clients really focus on key areas of the business, see how they're performing. One of the benefits of seeing all organizations out there, whether large, small, different models, large, very successful teams, different size teams, different formats, and different lead teams or SOI teams, and all the different ins and outs. You see a lot of what's working, what's not working. And then from that, you create benchmarks and best practices. So part of it that we work with our clients is able to say, what, let's shed some light on your business. Let's look at how it's performing. We do something called an annual business audit. And we actually got rid of the word audit and called it a review because we didn't want to give heart palpitations to everybody. So we actually do a whole review of the financials, the tech stack, the marketing, and we have a full overview of it, and we share best practices. And that's one of the very desirable pieces of the business that we support, or things that we do to support brokerages and teams, is enable them to see how they're performing. And one of the things that comes, just as a quick aside, Matt, one thing that comes from that exercise, one is that actually we can confirm to them that actually they're doing things really well. So that just peace of mind is worth a lot, because as we know, brokerages aren't opening their books, not sharing insight in how they're performing. So sometimes, not sometimes, you're on an island really running your brokerage. You don't have too much insight into how key areas should be performing. And am I doing well? I think I'm doing well. I'm not sure. I'm making decent money. Maybe I'm not making decent money. How is this working? How can I improve? So sometimes we're able to say, you are doing a lot of good things, but it might be like a 5-degree difference in this area, where this would be a best practice. This would be something for you to tweak here. And in this area, tweak it this way, 1%, 2%, things like that. But when you look at, there's 7 key areas that we really hone in and look at. And of those 7 key areas, if we can help create a 2-degree difference here and 1, 2, 5 degrees there over those 7 areas, it's profound. The difference at the end of the day, as we know, those fractional changes make a huge difference to that bottom line over the course of that whatever timeline we're looking at.
Yeah. Well, and I want to dig into those 7 areas, and we talked about that a little bit offline, and I'm excited to share all of that with everybody. But I want to kind of punctuate. Again, I'm a former broker owner. You've talked to broker owners every day, and my suspicion, I don't have the data, but my suspicion is that most broker owners do a couple of things very wrong right now, and maybe always. I don't think most of them actually know their numbers, and part of not knowing your numbers is a clear delineation between the brokerage operations and expenses and everything like that versus commission dollars. I think 99 out of 100 broker owners are like, commingling sales commissions, the commissions that you make as an agent, with the operations of the brokerage and then lying to themselves about profitability and all that kind of stuff. So there's that. And I think the other big rock is, affiliated services, which either don't exist or aren't as profitable as they should be, all that stuff. So now maybe that may dig into the 7 pillars, but I want you to kind of comment on those 2 pieces first.
Well, the number one piece that you brought up is so true. Numbers are something that typically it's not a strong suit for a lot of broker owners or large teams or team leaders, things like that. It's more that personality trait that sometimes is the most effective in our business, is that more outgoing personality where, numbers is something, maybe it's not second, it's not 1 or 2 on the list of strengths. We always say it's not the superpower, maybe. So that is one of the biggest challenges. I'd agree with that, is the financials, the review of financials, understanding the in and X and the inflow and the outflow of money in different areas and not knowing what that looks like. And then the second piece of that is the owner, you said commingling, that kind of takes everybody down a mental path.
That's another one of those audit. It's one of those audit words we shouldn't use. I didn't mean commingling. Yeah. I take it back.
Yeah. So if you don't have the books nice and clean, where a lot of owners, for example, if they're actively selling or they do some sales, whatever the case might be, if they roll their numbers, some people pay themselves that 100%. So that money comes completely out and they pay themselves all that commission. And then that skews the number a little bit in there on the retained percentage, company dollar retained percentage, meaning the company dollar that's retained to go toward expenses and profit.
You're saying if the broker owner doesn't charge themselves a cap, basically.
Right. If it's a cap or traditional or however they pay or whatever the model is, some owners take all their commissions. Some of them put 100% into the company and then take money at the end through the profitability of the organization. So they're all over. It's all over the map. So one of the things that we do through our process, and we encourage others to do this, is look at your bottom line profit as a percentage of your total gross commission income, from all the income that came in from the transactions that you're doing. That's the commissions. It could be any fees, transaction fees, flat key commissions, or whatever you call them, other insights. So that's that revenue piece. And as a percentage, what are you making? And brokerages in today's world, if you're 8% or higher, that's what we call green. 4 to 8 is yellow, and under 4% is red, as toward a return on revenue, bottom line profit to the total revenue being generated from the activity of the sales of the business. And the margins are challenging. They're challenged. The margins are challenged both on the commission side from the public and commissions on negotiations to the agent side. And whether it's a cap or whether it's different models or transaction or flat fees or 100% concepts, whatever the model might be. There's ways that you'll see a compression in a couple areas, but that's where you bring up the other thing is the joint ventures, the MSAs, the marketing service agreements, or even ownership in affiliated businesses, such as those ones I just rattled off: mortgage, title, insurance, warranty. You also could be moving into, and some healthy organizations will be in property management, which I like. It's an inflationary hedge. People either own or they rent, and the other category, unfortunately, is homelessness, right? But you have people who own a home or they rent, right? So as ownership goes up, rental goes down a little bit, and it just goes like this. So owners go down, renters go higher. So that ends up being a nice, steady source of income for organizations that can basically go through ups and downs of markets like we're experiencing right now. Frankly, they can weather that storm better because they have a steady source of revenue coming to them in that form of property management.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks. You hit on that really well. And so, but on affiliated service, particularly mortgage, title, insurance, I think that a lot of brokers are still out to lunch on the fact that that needs to happen to really drive profitability. But then I think there's a whole nother big swath of brokers who have dug into one or more of those services and realized that it's harder to execute than it looks on the front end. So
Yeah.
just talk to me a little bit about that arena. How do you counsel people? And what do you see? Do you see it the way I'm describing it? That it's a much more difficult road to hoe than it looks like, and that there's also another huge hunk of brokers that aren't even in the game yet.
No, it's so true. Yes, there's it's another business. So it's not like, hey, I'm running this. I'm going to start off a little some other side business, mortgage or title insurance, and it's going to take care of itself. No, it's a whole nother functioning business. So one of the recommendations, or one of the things that we see down this path, and I always kind of use an analogy here on crawl, walk, run. So if you're going to move into that space, you might want to crawl first, and the crawling would be moving into a marketing service agreement. MSA is the acronym for it. So in the MSA space, you get a mortgage lender that's in your market. I would look at who's currently your buyer controlled sales and say, who's doing my current mortgages, who's doing the notes, or who's doing the mortgages for us, and approach the people that you might want to have an MSA with. You feel you could support, you could help put them in front of your agent population, whether it's team agents or brokerage or both, or brokers or both, and then increase that market share. What happens is there's a calculation that's made, and the mortgage company says, in that scenario, an MSA, they'll say, you know what, that's worth to us X dollars. So we'll pay you so much money per month, or we'll offset this expense or that expense, because we see as somebody you're going to market, or you're going to support us to get more buyer controlled sales out of the activities, then that's worth it to us. So that's the first step. That's crawl. The walk, what ends up happening is some people jump over that, or they'll stay in that space because it just feels good to them. The water's warm. Why move out of there? The JV, the joint venture, is the next venture that's getting into the walk phase, where you say, you know what, now I want to partner with them. I'm going to become a partnership. I want to create a 50-50 partnership or whatever. That's typically what we see is 50-50 in JVs, joint ventures. And then that you get an active partnership. You see P&Ls. We recommend profit and loss documents every month. Evaluate the performance. See evaluate the buyer controlled sales. Who's using your mortgage company? Who's not? Things like that. So then you want to get that usage higher. We call it capture rate. Good capture rate as a benchmark is over 20% in mortgage. So you want to get over 20%. That should be a target. Frankly, higher than that, but 20 at a minimum. And then the other next step is ownership. So then to say, okay, I'm going to go out and own it outright, and not be in a joint venture. So that's the third step. That's a big step. Title as well. Some people go MSA, some go JV with title.
Do you think that there's a set of numbers, and I guess we were mostly talking about mortgage there. Do you see a scale where, okay, walk was a crawl, walk, run? What's the monthly volume for crawl? What's the monthly volume for walk and run? To make it make sense.
Well, yeah, I do the calculations. So, and I don't have the calculations in my mind, so I'm going to spitball this. But I'd look at your buyer controlled sales, look at that total volume, and then say, okay, it depends on the market, depends on how many are cash buyers compared to finance the loan. So you'll know, the person watching this will know more about their business, of course, than I do at this point. But in that, if you got 20% capture of that buyer controlled sales units, what would be that in volume? And then what would be that in the loan amounts? And then if I did a point or two, what would be that money being generated to the mortgage company? And that's where you get into the conversation about that. And that's where you can and there's a third party company, depending on the size, you can go out to, called MLink, and they can be hired to do an analysis to evaluate the revenue that could be generated, and then what would that be. And it's actually not, it's a good protective step for RESPA, is where you can say we had an independent third party evaluate the viability of this partnership and this MSA, and decided that volume could be worth this amount of money. And because that becomes the starting point for negotiations, is what happens. Because they can come back and say, you know what, this is worth about $4,000 a month. In this capacity, we're going to have their name on the website. We're going to have their name on the door. We're going to do different things to help support the mortgage company, and all that marketing, advertising, and internal support is worth this. And then that becomes a starting point for people to negotiate. So whether they go to a third party and have something done like that, or they do it themselves and they run the numbers and pull the pencil out and kind of calculator and run it themselves, that's a starting point.
Awesome. That's great. Okay, well, listen, I want to get to the 7 pillars and run through those, and we may have touched on it a little bit, but to me, like those are the hot buttons in my mind.
Yeah.
So forgive me if we crossed over a little bit, but can you run through real quick, what those 7 aspects of business are that are most important for brokers to pay attention to? And then they can go back and listen through this thing and think, well, where am I on these seven pieces?
Yeah, well, the first is agents. That's the recruiting sense, part of the discussion. So nobody ever stays the same, and to think you're going to stay the same is a false premise. So everyone's getting bigger or smaller. You're never staying the same. So you need to be focused on that open funnel of bringing people into the organization, and that's whether you're a team or you're a brokerage. Doesn't make a difference. You got to bring in, and think of it this way too. If I have, there's really talented people out there too. So you're constantly trying to improve the talent pool that you have. So you should always be bringing people in. That is by far the number one most important thing. And many of us have heard this in this space for many, many years, decades. I always say I could stop right there, because the other 6 things will take care of themselves if you're really strong on that number one thing. All right. The second is the units. What is that per person productivity? So what are your closed units? So what are your closed units? How does that relate to your per person productivity, depending on your agent count? If you're above 10 closed units per person on a yearly basis, that's in the green in a brokerage format. If you go to a team, it's much higher than that as a team. But in a brokerage, it's 10 or higher. If it's 7 or under, that's red. So somewhere between 7 and 10 is in the yellow as toward per person productivity. So knowing that becomes something you utilize in your recruiting efforts and things along those lines. So you have agents, you have the units that they're closing. Then we go into price. What is the average price? How does that compare to your general marketplace? We really like to see a little higher than the average price. That means you're really doing a lot of the lower price, but you're also tapping into the higher price. You never want to be kind of really on the top or really on the bottom. So a little higher than the average is good for your marketplace. You also have some control. When we lay out these 7 things, you have some control. We don't control the weather. We don't control the job market. We don't control the interest rates. There's a lot of things in our world we don't have any control over. You do have control over the things that I'm going to rattle off here. And so in the price, you can start looking at your marketplace and say, you know what, I'm looking to generate more sales in the upper price areas here and there. They become geographical farms or things like that. We call them primary markets, things along those lines. So you can be proactive in that front. You can recruit agents who will do that higher level business, so on and so forth, right? So we've got agents, we got units, we got the average price going on, and then we get into the commission. What's the average commission that you're generating? And we'd encourage you to break it out on both sides, list side, buy side. So you can evaluate that. If you have multiple locations, I would break it out to each location and say which location is doing better than others. Let's do best practices. Let's talk about, you'll have some agents, for example, who really kill it. They're really strong on that end. You have others that they're weak. And then you can highlight the strength in the people that are strong and say what they do, what they say, help coach that. That should be something of an area of focus. Typically, I just did an analysis, so it's top of mind. So a brokerage we're working with doing about $400 million in business, and a 0.1% increase. So a 2 point, just throw out any number. I know they're all negotiable. 2.5 to 2.6 was over 100 grand in company dollar to that organization. So one slight little tick up could really, or one slight tick down could really affect a brokerage to a high level. So I'd encourage the brokers and the teams that are listening to this, if you don't know what that number is, I would find out what that 0.1% difference means to you in the form of company dollar. And then that would be something that really help you stay focused on this and help generate more business. Then we go into expenses. What are the expenses? We encourage, and we touched on this earlier, Matt, when you say about, finances and things like that. We encourage you to break your expenses into 6 buckets. Many brokerages, they use QuickBooks as they're smaller or mid-size. QuickBooks puts your expenses in alphabetical order. And I always say this with a smile, but that's Sesame Street, and we're not Sesame Street. So you want to bucket your expenses, all right? Your 2 largest expenses are going to be your staff, so employees, and then your facilities. Those are going to be your 2 biggest. Then you go into marketing, you got general marketing, you've got lead gen marketing, you've got technology expenses, and you've got other. So I'd put them in those areas. If you've got other that's really robust, high levels of expense there, I'd break that out and say, okay, let's break that into another category because there's something too big in there. So expenses there. Then you want to, from that, we come down to what's called company dollar percentage. What is the company dollar percentage that you're retaining? So when you pay, and this is all on the top side of the P&L, you have your general GCI, gross commission income, that comes in. You have fees that you charge the public, for transaction fees, whatever they might be. And so you have all that revenue. Then you pay your agents, and you pay referral fees, and you pay, you might have if you're a franchise, you pay a franchise fee, whatever. You have all those fees that go out. And what you have left is what's called company dollar. That company dollar are also gross profit. As a percentage of your total revenue, what is that percentage? 17, depending on your model, 17 to 27 in the more traditional models is going to be in the green. And this is one of the few benchmarks. As you go further away from that sweet spot, you go yellow and you go red. So if you get too thin, you're not making enough money to make profitable. And if you go too high, your agents will get poached by competitors because you're charging too much. And it really comes down to the value prop that you're offering. So that's the company dollar. And then the last one on this list is going to be your return on revenue. What is that bottom line profit? I mentioned this earlier. We gave the benchmarks earlier. What are you doing? And these are real kind of key areas to pay attention to because they'll illuminate, the performance. So when I look at a profit and loss document in a company, I'll quickly look at, all right, those key areas, there's 7 areas, and they just speak volumes. If that ROR, is in the 10, 12, 14% as a company, they're doing a great job. They're really honing in on a lot of things. And now this is to your other point, Matt, this is exclusive outside of mortgage, title, warranty, property management, all that. This is the brokerage by itself in that P&L. And then what happens is you should do a roll up. So if you do have mortgage, title, warranty, insurance, or any one or more of those, and property management, resort rentals, or anything else, then you do a roll up. Each one of those should have their own profit and loss document. And then you do a roll up P&L, roll it all up into one, and see how the whole organization is performing as a total return on revenue. So,
wow, man, that's a list. Definitely. And I want to bring back the point that we were talking about at the very beginning. That when you were talking about expenses, I started thinking, people don't get granular enough into what are those expenses, and are those expenses specific to the brokerage and growth of the brokerage, or all of a sudden are we advertising to consumer for sales and things that end up on the commission side, and so there's no delineation on the expense side between the brokerage and team or whatever. And so, I think that's a really important area. But of course, the secondary services and having all that stuff separated out, and knowing your numbers, every coach in the world will tell you that knowing your numbers is a big deal. But I think for some reason, a lot of brokers sort of give themselves a pass because most of them are very mom and pop oriented until you get to the largest organizations. And that may be an asset of being in a big franchise organization or something larger where they have that sort of structure and framework that holds you accountable to those things. But in the absence of that, I think it's a real limit. But Dean, this has been absolutely incredible. That was a power-packed 30 minutes. If brokers are listening to this and they want more, they want to work with you or they want to talk to you more, how do they find you?
They can find me, T3 is Dean at T360.com is my email. So feel free to email me. You can go to our website too, T360.com, get some more details about our services, our brokerage services. We have other divisions that support our industry as well. So we're technology, we have hiring services, we have event services, and a few other ones. So it's all right there on T360.com, or just reach out to me directly.
And
thanks, Matt.
The T3 Summit is a big deal. And I'm shocked always how many brokers don't know. It's one of the best events of the year. When is the T3 Summit this year?
So there's two that we have. The one you're talking about is our leadership summit, and it's an invite only. So that's
Oh,
potentially some, and it's 400 people that we bring in, top leadership in our space. It's really a mastermind kind of a concept, and it's awesome. We were in our just did our 10th year. It's in the spring, so it varies, but typically around end of April, beginning of May. And so we just had that and down in Naples, Florida. And then we have a tech summit now. We're going in our second year now with our technology summit, which is really a fascinating way. We're trying to take, the normal event where you walk through and you have all the vendors and things like that. They're trying to make it much more interactive where we tie things together. So if you have this technology, follow up boss, what are the things that tie together? And we have them in the same room. So you can literally take a process like from the beginning of that lead being generated all the way through the process. How would that look? What's it look like? And what are the vendors that support that? So it's a neat thing. It's called our Tech Summit. You'll see it if you go to T3 Tech, go to the T3. I don't want to take everyone to different websites. There's a lot of websites, but you can get there from the T360.com. You'll find it.
awesome. Dean, that was incredible. Thanks so much. And thanks to everybody listening in from the Triangle MLS world. We'll see you back here again real soon. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.